Welcome to the No BS Podcast, an unfiltered look into the global hospitality and short-term rental industry with a focus on founder stories, current events, and culture.
I'm Mateo Bradford Vasquez.
And I'm John Stokinger.
And this is our podcast. We bring the right people to the table at the right time, giving you an inside take on the hospitality industry like no other podcast can.
We appreciate your support. So let's make this official. Make sure to like, follow, and leave a review for the No BS Pod on your favorite podcast listening platforms.
And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel as well. While you're there, please like, listen, and subscribe. And oh yeah, make sure to hit the notification button to stay up to date on all of the exciting things that No BS Productions has coming up.
Good morning, Mateo. How are you?
Good morning, brother. I'm doing just fine. How are you?
I'm good. We're back. Super important episode. It is Human Trafficking Awareness Month in January. We have a great guest, a co-founder and president. I'm clapping my hands here. I'm like, what am I doing? Co-founder and president of Autohost, Ela Mezhiborsky.
Good job. Way to go.
I said it early on. If I waited another 2 or 3 minutes, I probably would have murdered it. But
you don't want to ruin your reputation as a name assassin. So you could just...
So we have a great guest. Ela, thank you so much for joining us this week. Absolutely. This is, so we want to start, obviously, we're going to dive deeper. We're going to talk about the human trafficking component of vacation rentals and short-term rentals and the other unsavory dark side of our industry that no one really wants to talk about and in a way that no one else will. So we're excited to be able to bring this to the forefront. And we have some exciting news also at the end. So please listen all the way through. And if you don't and you have to leave, 100% go to the show notes. We're going to have an amazing link for you to get some more information and to help your teams. But with that, let's learn more a little bit about you and your role at Autohost, and just give us your story. How did you come into the space?
Yeah. So I originally come from short-term rentals. So PMC, I think many of us started on the vendor and tech space. You have to really feel the problem and be frustrated enough to come up with a solution that will then work for others. For those that don't know, Autohost is an AI-driven guest screening and verification platform. So we handle the entire process. We're focused on hospitality and STRs, and we really handle everything from collecting ID, security deposit, fraud detection, fighting chargebacks, all the fun stuff. So we have a beautiful industry, but unfortunately, either it's bad apples or just process automation once you go in bulk. So there was a big need for the screening side. So that's what Autohost does. How I came to this was I ran a property management company that didn't have that. And so when you're small, then you go by gut feeling. And if we're being honest, gut feeling is not bad at the beginning. If somebody's up to no good and they're going to throw a party, you kind of feel for it. But then as you grow and scale, you see that your team of guest support agents don't necessarily have the same either gut feeling as you, or your gut feeling isn't always right. And then we got into this sort of an internal tool to help us categorize guests better, screen a little bit, figure out that if somebody's really seems to be not very risky, we don't need to send them capital letters and say, no loud music after 1 a.m.
Right.
In some cases, you kind of want to be like picture with your rules, make sure they're okay with it, and then you make sure your guests are better behaved and so on. And that's how we got into internal guest screening. And then maybe I'll save that for a little bit later. If we dive into it, I'll just say right now, at some point, shit hit the fan. And it is related to what we're talking about, but that kind of drove us to the next level. Okay, far beyond parties, you're dealing with fraud. And fake means fake identities. And behind a fake identity isn't John that doesn't want to pay out of pocket. There's a reason why you're hiding your identity and using a stolen credit card. And that's when we get really into criminal activity. So you get into your gray area of issues with getting parties and smoking and rule compliance. And that sucks because you might lose your license. But then we get into criminal activity and you get into drug smuggling and escort services and sex trafficking and gang activity and all of these types of things that we as an industry, you can still lose money, lose your license, close down, but then dive into the whole moral and social and legal and ethical responsibility and so much more that we can be doing. Long story short, we took the product to the next level. We brought on a very good childhood friend, Roy Firestein, and he was at the time just dealing with kind of all things development engineering, kind of chief product officer, another startup, but just he comes from the cybersecurity space. And we decided it was time to take this internal screening to the next level. And then when that was there and then the pandemic hit, it was the right time to realize that players way bigger and better than us need this yesterday. And they, especially as the pandemic is here and they're trying to keep the revenue but not let risk in, it was a really good time for us to provide that solution out to the industry. And that's how Autohost was born.
When we had a conversation last week, you had mentioned a light bulb moment where you realized by looking at a bill, an electric bill, that some illegal activity was, or potential illegal activity at the time was happening. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
And who would have thought, right? Make sure everybody write that down, go look at all of your electric bills. No, so yeah, what happened was this. It actually all started, it started a little bit earlier. So there was this dramatic moment. It was Christmas Eve 2016, I believe, that we received a phone call from Toronto Deputy Police that said they had a confirmed sighting of a known gang member posting on Instagram with automatic weapons, asking us whether they have our permission to raid the place. We gave our permission, and that launched a very intense investigation. And luckily, at the time, we had like a version 1.0 of whatever is now Autohost. So we actually were able to then go and say, which devices was this booked from? And what were the IP addresses? And was there anything we could have spotted in advance? Because we were just on the lookout for parties. We're like, hey, if it's a weekend one-nighter and the classic culprits. Oh, if it's a local on a weekend and a one-nighter and a young person, then duh, it's a party kind of thing. But it goes way beyond that. And when you get into sophisticated fraud, the cover story is actually going to be really good. It's not going to be somebody who's booking one night on a weekend.
Right. Yeah, these are pros, right? They're like, this is their livelihood.
Exactly.
They thought of everything, and that's where you have to come in and you have to think of what they're thinking of already.
And sometimes just like human judgment and the naked eye can't tell that something is fraudulent. So anyway, so that was the start of it. So we had a little bit our eyes open on the lookout at the time. That resulted in a little over $20,000 losses for us during that Christmas season. Turns out we've been targeted, and so a lot of properties got booked, and then we got chargebacks from them. But we were already on the lookout, and so while a police investigation was going on, we at some point identified that one of our properties had a hydro bill that came back about 4 times the usual amount. And then when we dove into the specific usage throughout the month, we saw that all of it came for this specific, I think, 5-day window. We go back to the reservation and we have Autohost 1.0. Who is this? And we're like, they supposedly answered the question. They passed some things. We didn't have enough of the fraud and ID verification to the level of intensity that we had right now. They really weren't very communicative. The cleaners reported the place was left a mess. We didn't hear from them much, but it happened and it went by, and it was a chargeback, but we didn't know much more about it. And then, long story short, this did dive into what they provided those specific 5 days. And what we ended up identifying was that during that week, this specific Montreal gang ran escort services throughout lots of different properties in a given building. And our unit happened to just be used for laundry 24/7.
Crazy.
And that's what triggered it. And I think that if we link back to what this is about, sure, we lost $2,000 for the reservation, but I couldn't sleep at night. And I realized that, sure, police concluded escort services and then they go on with their day. But I'm like, but hold on, what role did we play? And I think that really got me to go deeper into this whole concept of we as a short-term rental, hospitality in general, but short-term rental industry, of course we're not the ones doing this, nor do we condone it, but we end up enabling it just by definition. It's the type of fraudulent activity that needs a place to happen. So unlike a transaction where you sell somebody a shirt and they pay you with a fake credit card and you might lose the money, you're giving keys and things happen behind closed doors. And that's when you get to the fact that I think as humans, and it's such a beautiful industry that we're running, we have a responsibility on all levels to make sure that whatever happens behind closed doors is something that we stand behind.
Yeah, there's a moral and ethical tone to this that is, what are we condoning, maybe unbeknownst to us in the industry? We need to open our eyes as an industry. And we've talked about this on a previous podcast, and I'm so glad we're diving into with Catherine Radcliffe. So we're,
Shout out to Catherine.
we had a great podcast with her, but this is important to do this at this month, to talk about this and to bring awareness, because on top of the fiscal and business side of it, what am I losing? We're going to lose out on revenue or this different things. There's a moral and ethical responsibility to that you as hosts and operators and property managers need to take seriously. And what does that mean to you in your business? Like, who does this touch? It's not just the reservationists and it's not just the owners. This is every person in your organization needs to be aware of the key factors and the key things to look out for, because it's not just what Ela is finding on a hydro bill. And for those here in the States, that's your water bill.
But John, it also goes to a deeper question of, again, right? Like she had the ability to look at something odd through a bill. How many people are even aware of paying attention to this thing? Because it speaks to a larger question of, what are the things that are obvious we see? Of course, we have parties, you have drug use policies, you have other things. But when it comes to things such as human trafficking, which I want to talk about, even the term human trafficking, because it has such a broad definition now that I don't think a lot of people really understand what it is. I think they think of Taken, right? The movie of, oh, you get a kidnapped tourist and now she's being forcefully moved from place to place for sex crimes. But it's also so much more than that, right? There's so many levels of human trafficking that are going on, whether it's forced labor, whether it's other criminal and nefarious activities that go on. Even since our last conversation with Catherine, I had to go back and look at the depth at which this actually, what it really means in definition. And Ela, I'd love to get your kind of feedback around the depth of that term, because I know it's expanded into something that people used to call like pimping and pandering and other things. So even at a basic level, like with the human trafficking, what are we really dealing with in our industry? What does this really mean?
First of all, I believe that, especially when we talk about, there's human trafficking in all sorts of ways you can take a human and kind of void them of their rights and have them do something against their will. When we're talking about specifically sex trafficking and kind of sex work, I think the definition would be that the people need to be under perfectly, or there's elements of whether they're doing it out of consent or not. But generally speaking, we talk about trafficking victims. I think 11 to 14 are the ages when those kids get either lured in. Some do get kidnapped, but you're right that it's usually not that dramatic of a thing that you might see from the side. In terms of myth debunking, ironically enough, a lot of the traffickers, from what I understand it from a lot of awareness courses, they end up knowing the victim or being related to. It's situations where kids are in some sort of a state in their lives that it leads to this sort of thing, but then you get into a whole industry. So there's the kids or people, by the way, kids, I think that there is trafficking happening worldwide, but 23% of it is in the United States. And out of that, I think that 2 out of every 3 are young girls, but that also means, and that's where you get into the whole awareness need. I think that at the beginning, hotels were the first to jump and say, okay, awareness is needed. I heard of a tragic case, I think, when I actually went to court, where a girl was suing the hotel receptionist because she was basically saying, I was here every other day with a different older man and I looked you in the eyes and you must have known. And we're not going to dive into where she did or didn't, but the point is that some element of not turning a blind eye and being aware and having your kind of senses out is something that is the responsibility of the operator to be aware of. Back to the fact that usually this happens in hotels, in short-term rentals. So yes, trafficking, normally girls, younger in age. It gets a little bit tough. I think with escort services, a big thing that I learned to understand was that, and that's really sad if we're getting into, let's open this up, but girls that get, or kids that get trafficked when they're younger, once they are released of it when they come of age, they might choose to go into prostitution and escort services.
It's what they know.
Yeah.
And and comfort level's the wrong choice of words here. But again, when you are being, and those aren't watching, I'm using air quotes, taken care of, and you have a roof over your head and or drugs in your system and or money a little bit in your pocket,
Yeah.
when you don't have to, again, air quotes, worry about where you're going to put your head at night and you're fed to some extent. It's just, all right. Yes, you know where I'm going with this. I want to take this. I want to keep going in the same direction, but I want to talk about the awareness aspect of it. We all travel. We travel for the industry, and we know that we see this all the time in airports. You're going to see human trafficking awareness. There's in every. You hear it come over the intercom systems. You hear it in the trams going around the airports. You see that's in rest areas when you're driving in the interstate. And there's certain sections actually like just north of me. I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana, north in between Chicago and here. And it's like one of the largest human trafficking like areas in the US.
Really?
Yeah, it's
Oh, yeah.
weird. Well, and a lot of it is, and another one is actually in Vermont, where there's borders that aren't as secure between Canada and the US or not as monitored. Those are higher traffic, and it's always on the interstates, and there's routes, right? Interstate 80 that goes in 80 and 90 that goes east to west in the
Mhm.
US are huge human trafficking interstates.
Mm.
What is this? So where I'm going with this is there's awareness here. There's awareness in the hotels, right? There people are being taught to see these, at least the workers in the hotels, and then travelers in like driving and or flying. There's lots of talk of this, but again, you go into an STR, a short-term rental or vacation rental, like this isn't necessarily brought to your attention. I think should be some sort of on websites, there needs to be some sort of attention. There needs to be some sort of accreditation potentially we talked about this when we had Catherine on. What does that mean? What does accreditation mean? What's it when certain states have more mandatory rules and regulations about this? I think Florida has one, but is it enforced? What does it mean if you don't do it? I think that if I were to stay in a short-term rental and I see that their whole team has been trained and re-upped every year or every 2 years on what is important, might feel safer.
Impressive. There's also, I think you mentioned the whole, everybody, so nobody will actively support this. But now you're getting into what's intuitive and what's a gut feeling. And I think that we as hospitality, we're so hung up on the gray area that I was talking about, parties, vandalism. And so it's almost like the uneducated short-term rental operator or employee will look for the sketchy people. They will look for the ones that on paper, if you were to envision that monster that's going to go into sex trafficking, you're trying to figure out whatever version in your head of that person might come out. And it's important to also debunk that statistically, that's middle-aged white men, professional, with money, able to be discreet, that for all other checklist items that we usually look for, they're going to be the easy, oh my God, here's the red carpet, right? Like you're our ideal guest.
Mhm.
Right.
And that,
And not to say, yes, statistically it's more, but we're seeing it more and more. I was doing some research before of middle-aged white women that are partnering with these men to make it more official, to make it more like a couple or whatnot, these are advanced, thought out schemes.
Well,
And
that's the challenge, right? Like, how do you, so with the training and everything that you're asking people to do, it's not use your eyes, right? It's not use what you think it is, right? It's the training in what people need to be looking for is how do you see through the smoke and mirrors? How do you see what's being presented and find the water bill or find the outliers or find the other things that are going to actually point to the issue? Because you're clearly dealing with people that understand, like, from an optics standpoint, if it looks good, it's probably going to pass. If it looks good, like again, and let's be very honest and very clear here too. With our industry, you're dealing with people who are very busy and aren't necessarily prepared or ready to take on the task of sorting this out, right? And so there has to be technology assisting us. There has to be rules and standards. that are consistently evolving, because this isn't going to be like, oh, this is how it works and it's in this box and this is the only way this happens. It's going to be continually evolving. They're going to be they're going to be technologically proficient in ways that we're going to have to keep up to as an industry, right? Because this is what they do every day in and day out. And on the human trafficking side, and it goes expansively into just the criminal and nefarious activities that are going to be taken advantage of, because our industry has the ability for them to do that.
Drugs, firearms, et cetera,
Right.
et cetera.
So,
Yeah.
I think
Firearms. Yeah.
rentals make it a lot easier, by the way. And the police back then when we were investigating, they told us about a different location where the rental place was a 3-bedroom, whether unit or a house. And then they were basically running girls in the 3 rooms and selling fentanyl in the living room.
Yes.
You have the drug deals going on. You have
Yeah.
in and out. And that's where, and we don't have that front desk and we don't have those security measures yet, or we're working on that. So what you're saying, 100%, like just hitting the nail on the head, that's like that awareness and education and whatever follows is crucial for us to be able to fight it.
And let's think about this a little bit deeper. Who does let's think of an operator that has 50 units or 100 units or 20 units, it doesn't matter. Who are the people that have eyes on the properties? It is your maintenance team. It's your housekeeping team. And so internally, those are your 2 teams that have most eyes on the properties. And these are the ones that, unfortunately, aren't the one there's a couple of things that are holding us back. A, they're not the ones that are available to get trained because they're too busy doing turns or whatnot.
Well,
And right, exactly. They should be. And or potentially there's a language barrier, if we're being honest here, about what's going on. So there's that aspect of it as well. But then to take it a step further, property management companies, hosts, co-hosts, whatever, you need to have a positive, productive relationship with your property's neighbors in a way where you can actually communicate, because you know who's actually looking at your property more than anyone else? Your neighbors.
Yeah.
Your neighbors know more of what's going on in your property than anyone else does.
Yeah.
And whether that's good or bad, in this instance, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're very different than hotels, right? Because hotels have more kind of standardized operations. They have more standardized, and plus there's just more traffic, right? So there's more people coming in with various eyes and people who are seeing things, whereas homes are secluded. And again, you have different home types. You have rentals of all scope, whether they're urban, beach, forest, mountain, whatever. Like there's a depth that we have that other areas of hospitality, while we can all learn from each other, I think with us specifically. And again, like there's no cameras inside the house, so people aren't like necessarily being able to see what's going on inside those properties. But yeah, you may be your neighbors, but you may be in a place where you don't have neighbors. That's ideal for that. Or if it's in a building where there's lots of rentals and it's off season, there may not be neighbors around. So the dynamic is just crazy.
You touched on timeframes. I think that catching it while it happens is people having their eyes out and having the kind of attention and point out something feels sketchy and feels not safe and call the police is super important. I also believe there's a company, I hope I don't butcher the name, I think it's called Operation Underground. It's run by Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore, where they work with either FBI or forces in the States to do real-time raids. I'll look into it. I might be butchering the name, but it's basically the company that works on real time. So they get any intel and they would do real-time raids. And dreaming big, if our industry can one day help those types of operations, provide data, that would be incredible. Looking at the hydro bill was still identifying something after the fact, but still dealing with it and providing police information. And obviously, prevention is a huge part of it. And it doesn't always have to be automated guest screening, but being aware of who walks through the door. You don't know, no matter how small you are, lack of technology is also not an excuse. There's a way to use tech to scale, but either way, being aware who's there, not turning a blind eye. I always refer back, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Japan. I visited Japan in 2000, and actually, sorry, it might not even be just in Japan, but I was there in 2009, and they have they're notorious for these love hotels in Tokyo. And you know, love hotels, you come to a place, and in a very tiny slit under a shaded window, you slip a bill, and then you get a key, and it's all very discreet, and could be a fun party and you're going to stay overnight in Tokyo in a love hotel after you've been out partying. But that's also the biggest loophole and window to anything that isn't legitimate and shouldn't be happening. And so I think that image is in my head that we in North America and worldwide, really in the modern world, cannot afford to be that slit in the window. Somebody's trying to hide their, you should be encrypting stuff. Don't just take copies of IDs and release them left and right. But if somebody's trying to completely hide their identity, the chances that they have a good reason are slim to none. And therefore, there's really an element of knowing who walks through that door, which now we're getting into the whole, any scrutiny against the short-term rental industry. You don't know who walks through the door. Well, you should know who walks through the door. And you should be
100%.
most
In today's day and age, there's no reason why, like you need to know everyone that's in that property. And there's enough technology and it's been around for a while. And whether you're going auto host or you're going a different direction, it doesn't matter. Prioritize the safety of your guests and the safety of yourself as a company. Because if we're going to really look at this, they're on top of an ethical and moral obligation. There's a legal obligation where what's that fine line when you're an accomplice? Like, where does that, who knows? I don't know. But in certain situations, if you're ruled by looking with a blind eye or not looking, whatever.
if it's paid to look the other way.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
You're getting into very gray area territory.
Well, and I think for us, it's as an industry.
Sorry, I'll be clarified. It could be paid by you. It could be paid not by you. But that's where the integrity of your employees is also important. Their education is important, and you standing behind this as a company because, your employees could be paid off by the guests just to look the other way.
Or to facilitate. You don't know if your people could be there facilitating this, making it happen. And I think there are so many conversations that we need to be having in the SDR space specifically. I think hotels have adopted policy and training at a formal level. Not super understand. I know it happens, but I'm not super involved in exactly what it looks like. Outside of the stuff that Catherine's doing and what you're doing, like, why is it taking so long for us to take a hold of this and take responsibility? Speaking even just in the North American side of the business, I don't know what's going on in Europe, if they're doing things differently or in other places in the world, but because of where we're at, and there's such a high percentage, what'd you say, 23% of it's happening in the United States? That's crazy. What is going on? Is it ignorance? Is it just blind eye to it? Is it people don't know what to do? In your experience and what you've been dealing with, why are we so far behind the ball here?
Yeah. I'd say, first of all, progress is being made. But like I said, it's only during the pandemic that the short-term rental industry and the vacation rental space became more of a lucrative target. So I think traffickers are realizing that it's more profitable and less risky because people are less aware, there's less education. The immediate answer to your question is to begin with the awareness. I mentioned Dr. Judy Osterhage, and we'll actually share later. I said that she was kind enough. There is a course that she offers for trafficking awareness course, specifically in the vacation rental space, that all the employees really should be encouraged to go through. It usually goes for $149. You're going to be providing a link to offer the course for $100, but 4 stages.
Let's pause right here. Yes, 100%. We are doing that. So check a link right now. You and your team need to go ahead. It's only $100. It's an amazing course. It normally goes for $149. Ela reached out to her. We got a discount specifically for listeners of the No BS podcast. So take action. This is, and we'll figure out more ways, more call to actions, and we'll talk about that too. But start here. It's $100. Like, it's a drop in the hat that you and your team can use this course to educate yourself. And then maybe we'll figure out some sort of badge or something. Maybe we could talk with Judy and figure out how do we go ahead and promote this even greater. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What's that?
Conference topics, education.
Yeah, and we've tried.
Not even trying. But it's even not about trying, right? Like now, again, this is something that is along the lines of, we talk about party quashing and technology that goes against that. It's a topic that directly affects the industry. And
that's valuable. The noise graphs that come from a party escalating versus sex trafficking happening throughout the night are very different.
Yeah.
The door opening. So a lot of door lock companies will monitor how many times the door opens. The trend and the graph of the door opening when guests are coming over for dinner versus trafficking is happening throughout the evening is very different.
Right.
The stats you can be looking at. And then you can go back and see you collected information with the guest and you can be passing it on. So 100%. And that starts with your awareness education. And I think, John, that's a great way to stop it. You're right. Sorry, stopping the challenge. The course is extremely important. I was just going to give a bit of a glimpse. I know that Judy talks about 4 very important stages that we as an industry need to go through. And that's really awareness, education, prevention, and protection. And when he broke those down to me, really resonated because awareness is easier said than done. Everybody will just hear sex trafficking and say, oh yeah, it's bad, and then move on with their day. So the next level of awareness is really to be aware of what you don't know, to understand that some things are less intuitive than we might think, and therefore you want to be taking action. Education and courses really is that next step, making sure that you as a property management company, you're aware, that your team is aware, that you're preaching it, diving all the way to prevention, whatever tools you can do, whether it's before, during, or after, preventing it as a whole, but really not turning a blind eye. And then protection is all of those measures that you can take later on to make sure that, and there's tips and tricks that she shares and other information that I encourage everybody to just go into your own research to make sure that you're proactive about it rather than just sit in the fine lines and say, yeah, it's bad, but it doesn't really touch me. It does touch us.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and leave the links to all of these in the show notes on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You'll have access to these links. And I'm calling everybody out right now. Fucking do it. It's $100. Like truly, it's $100. Do it. It's one thing to go to her website and read it. Great. Like take the step, take the initiative, take some pride in who you are as an operator, spend the $100, learn about this, and educate your team. There. Sorry.
No, I got nothing else. Like I want to stop here.
Okay, I want to take this a little bit further here. If you were, all right, Ela, put your operator shoes back on. You just listened to this podcast. You've just realized that, all right, you heard some rumblings that it's a real issue. Now you're like, oh shit, this is a real issue. We talked about in the past. And keep an eye out for events and stuff too. Events are big indicators like Super Bowls, and anytime a large event is happening in your neck of the woods, it is a breeding ground, unfortunately, for activity. That is, whether it's a giant concert, anytime there's more people that would be potentially want to buy shit, there's a greater chance that there is some sort of trafficking going on. These are other key factors to go ahead and look out for. But all right, Ela, you're running your property management company. You just now have been like, okay, I should take this seriously. What are your first steps? What's your checklist?
So assuming I don't know as much as I do, I think your first conclusion should be just, I don't know enough. Like, not to go to I'm an accomplice by definition, but just admitting that I don't know enough is really important, and admitting that gut feeling is not sufficient. So maybe even from a course perspective, go take it yourself. That's $100. Before you commit to having your entire team go through this, go take the course. See what you can conclude, see all of the myths that will be debunked, see some strategies. I think many operators will say that instead of me gathering the entire team, whether you have a small team or a large one, anybody who's interacting with guests before the stay, during the stay, or after it should be aware. So the course and getting that education, and then following those types of tips. I think even things like you mentioned in airports that there are signs about war against trafficking, but imagine in short-term rental kind of units, there will be like little signs to say that we don't support human trafficking. And then imagine that person that walks into that unit and sees that. That's going to play a role in a very unpleasant state.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I didn't even think of that. I'm a trafficker. I'm going to a property of whatever I'm trafficking. I'm in this property. I'm like, oh, now maybe they have greater eyes on what we're doing. They're aware. There's some sort of awareness. Like at least they know that this type of activity is going on. It might not do anything, but it might actually do something.
Right. You know what? Just given we're the No BS podcast, let's dive into the fact there's 3 parties to this. So you mentioned the trafficker, but the trafficker is in a horrible ways the business owner. There's
Right.
traffickers and there's the victims, but then there's
100%.
clients are not the actual traffickers. They're the ones that are using this. So it's those people that might and should be ashamed of what they're doing. And for them to walk into a property, they kind of very boldly state that we're against that. I think
Yeah.
that will be a big element of feeling ashamed, potentially either stopping, not doing it again. So that's also a big audience that we want. We want to be shaming. We want to be stopping, even if there's no direct eyes on you guys. If again, we can do anything to make sure that we know it's happening. It says it's happening, but not in my properties. And the more people say that, not in my properties, then we as an industry are actually like making a dent and fighting sex trafficking. That's huge.
I absolutely love this. Every one of us has bumped into or potentially knows someone or been in a room or something. Like the statistics are so high that every one of us that's here on this podcast today or listening to this podcast has had some sort of encounter, whether by actual conversation or proximity to some sort of trafficking.
And that's insane.
This awareness is so huge. And you talked about it, 26% of all human trafficking happens here in the US. I would love to know the statistic of that 26%, how much of that 26% is now happening in short-term rentals?
Yeah.
What part of that 26%? Is it 50%? Is it 0% is acceptable? But what is that? Is it 10%? That's a statistic I would love to know.
Well, that's worth going into for sure. We're against all of it, but wherever we have control is what we really should be aware of and understand it. I think changing the mentality, not to just, I obviously condemn it, to if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. That's something that we have the responsibility as an industry to do. Maybe people that are not in our industry have the privilege to just say, oh yeah, that sucks. It's bad. It's horrible. I wish it didn't happen. We can't just stop there.
We can't turn a blind eye. That's what I was trying to say earlier. If I messed that saying up. Can't turn a blind eye. This is heavy, but this is important. This is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. You need to go ahead and make a change. You need to go ahead and not turn a blind eye and do something about this. There's a link to go ahead and get Judy's course for only $100. Start there. If you need something, start there. Well, take it a step further. Acknowledge that this is a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Start there, then take a step. This is important. We're not doing enough. And I'm 100% calling out every one of our listeners, and you need to share this. This isn't one of the, hey, it would be great. This isn't a marketing tactic to get more listeners to our podcast. I couldn't give a shit. What I care about and what we care about is bringing awareness. Share this podcast, share this link. I would love to have Judy get so many purchases of this course that she is overwhelmed with and then maybe we can go ahead and get her to show up to a conference and speak and truly bring awareness to this and put a panel together on this. There's so much opportunity, and we're just continuing to scratch the surface at the beginning. This is only the second time that we've talked about this, and it's not the last. So here we're waving our flags saying that this is important. Thank you so much for joining us and bringing it to us.
I really appreciate it. We had a great discussion about this, and I appreciate the severity is clear to everyone, but not everybody takes on the whole, let's tackle it. So,
and I think shout out to you and Catherine and all the others that are really not letting this kind of just go status quo for us. And I think there does need to be, John, we need to take it a little bit further. There needs to be a continuing conversation around this, and not just on podcasts, but at conferences, at places where hosts and operators are learning how technology and other things are vetting other aspects of security for their properties and things like that. This needs to be a specific part of the education process for them. And knowing that there's resources out there, creating resource banks, and even taking it hospitality wide, like learning what the hotels have done, learning what can be applied to the short-term rental industry. This is just the beginning, but I think it's going to be incumbent upon all of us to step up and do the parts that we can to keep awareness here, not just during the month of January, but year round and consistently until we are at a space to where it's not just something we're talking about in the background, but people can point to the things that they are doing to help put this to rest.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ella.
Thank you.
This is important. Take action.